In this video there are intense stories, spoilers, and extremely small details that you might have missed in the story. Today we are opening the deep abyss into the mysterious story of Silent Hill 2, and we're going even deeper, into the swamp of James's confusing thoughts. With this video, I want to show you even more small details and Easter eggs that will bring the story of Silent Hill a little closer to you, because the dark world and mysterious depths of Silent Hill are sometimes not so easy to see through. Especially when it comes to James's state of mind, it's not that easy. And that's why I want to give you a few more ideas with this video. Feel free to feed the algorithm with your comments or give a thumbs up if you enjoyed this video in the end. In my restless and recurring dreams, I keep seeing this town. It is so incredibly quiet. At the beginning, James convinces himself that Mary has been dead for 3 years. In reality, however, she only died recently. Little Mary is only 3 years old. For a very long time, courageous Mary tried to continually fight the illness and to finally overcome it. She's been afflicted by the illness for a total of 3 years. And that's when James's suffering begins as well. However, from Laura's letter, we can learn that Mary only died recently, namely exactly 3 weeks ago. We can see from James's finger that he hasn't worn a wedding ring for quite some time. You can only see the faint mark left by his wedding ring, and it seems he took it off quite some time ago because he was feeling far too depressed about Mary's long illness. There is frequent discussion on the internet about whether James already has Mary's corpse lying on the back seat. In fact, if you look closely, you can make out a silhouette here that could possibly be a body bag. Here you can once again clearly see the silhouette that can be made out on the back seat if you really get a bit closer to the car. And apparently this is also the case here. Mary's corpse, bolstered by the theory of the corpse on the back seat, the true ending is also referred to as the underwater or in water ending. Because in that ending, James basically doesn't even get out of the car, but instead drives straight into the water with Mary on the back seat, thereby committing suicide. This also suggests that this was probably the initial intended plan when Harry drove to Silent Hill, and that he subconsciously repressed it when he was looking around in the bathroom. The symptoms that begin to afflict James after Mary first fell ill can actually be discovered on a medical poster in the hospital. There you can see precisely which specific symptoms are also gnawing away at James. As you can tell, James's condition also deteriorates drastically the deeper you dive into his world. You notice this right at the first save point when you use it, that James's head is throbbing. And later on you notice it even more intensely. Here's a comparison. On the left, the first save point, and on the right, the last save point, where James already looks really quite frightened, even trembling at the lips in some moments if you look closely. And that's already a stark difference compared to his earlier symptoms, which then really become pronounced in the endgame. By the way, the messages we often find in Silent Hill are actually thoughts from James's subconscious. Here, various clues make it clear that these messages originate from James's own thoughts, and that Silent Hill is essentially a fictional town he has created for himself. A very special and cryptic message that points directly to this can, of course, be found inside Neely's bar, and it is this specific message right here. It basically says that something deep inside James has been lost, something that is now completely gone. In relation to Mary, he has lost his heavy burden because Mary has unfortunately died. The locations in Silent Hill 2 are also places from James' subconscious which he has created for himself. The prison and also the hospital are special examples of this. In some cases we even find messages that prove exactly that. You built your own prison, as it is written right here in this letter. And since we know that these messages are actually James's own thoughts, it becomes much easier for us to understand why we spend so much time in the hospital or in the prison, because in his world where Mary was ill, he inevitably found himself spending a significant amount of his time in hospitals. That Silent Hill is a place that reflects people's thoughts can also be clearly seen at the Lakeview Hotel. In James's illusions, thoughts and memories, it is a beautiful, magnificent place. In reality, however, the Lakeview Hotel has long since burned down, is underwater, and is completely destroyed. In fact, James becomes briefly aware of this when he actually finds himself inside a burned-out hotel. But this only happens because, for a moment, he realizes that he really did kill his wife before falling back into his deep abyss. That everything is a world made up of James's thoughts becomes especially clear when looking at the enemies. Most of the enemies are female, and they strongly tempt James with his own sexual thoughts, since, of course, he hasn't really been able to be intimate with Mary for 3 years. And here you can also see that the enemies are always female, and they even wear high heels. It gets even more macabre when James performs his strange pose. This is especially noticeable with the nurses, since James, of course, spent a lot of time in the hospital, that they are dressed especially sexy. Here, of course, we have a miniskirt and high heels, and you can see James's fantasies which he may have had about the nurses as well. What I find especially creepy is that the nurses get up in a really strange way, and that also shows again just how twisted James's fantasies actually were. Most of the boss enemies, on the other hand, are male in nature, and especially Angela's father has a very pronounced body part, which also threatens and attacks us here. Of course, this also represents Angela's past. We can see these body parts on almost all the boss enemies. And I think I don't need to explain this any further, you should basically know what is meant by that. What you only notice when you take a closer look at the corpses is that all the corpses we find in Silent Hill are actually James. It's actually exactly the same character model as James, and it represents the fact that James has already died several times in these worlds, or rather in his thoughts. He has already died several times in his mind. We can see this especially well at the television, because there we also find a covered corpse, which once again is James. We can recognize this especially well by the shoes and the pants. If you take a very close look at the whole thing and examine it, you can clearly see in comparison that James's pants and his shoes are exactly the same in every way. In this sense, all the corpses we find here are also James at the same time, who has repeatedly experienced his own deaths in his mind, or rather has died within his own thoughts. If we are in the inventory and look closely, quickly switching the menu, we can already see the film in the background, or rather the ending sequence in which James murders Mary. Of course, it's all very blurry, but you can already make out the silhouettes and actually recognize that it's the ending sequence from the videotape. We also find a very special Easter egg in the cinema. If we wait there for a while, we can once again see an ending sequence from the videotape, and we can watch it there. Additionally, we can of course find Mary's clothes, which have the flashlight with them, so these clothes belong to Mary. Mary wanted to fight her illness until the very end and tried to survive it somehow. The whole thing lasted 3 years, and we can also hear this in the recordings we find in the Lakeview Hotel. Of course, James's psyche also suffered greatly during these 3 years, and he became the person he is now in Silent Hill. Quite naturally, the significant question arises whether this illness is responsible for it, and especially What would have happened if we had ended this illness much earlier than we did? Have you also noticed that Mary's letter is becoming increasingly opaque and hard to read? At the beginning, we can still read it in full when we examine it. A little bit later on, even the photo of Mary actually changes, and the letter we received is then suddenly and actually blank. So this letter keeps changing, and the photo also continues to change. In the original Silent Hill 2, it was actually the case that the letter and even Mary's handwriting slowly disappeared completely from the inventory. By the way, the time we can see in Silent Hill is consistently frozen at the exact same moment, and it's the same on every clock. All of these clocks show the time as 9 o'clock, 10 minutes and 15 seconds in the evening, and this is widely interpreted as the exact time of Mary's death. And apparently that's where she died, and that's why it's also a major part of the clock puzzle. The correct time. We've talked a lot about James's thoughts and Mary, but there are still many other protagonists in Silent Hill 2, like Maria, whom we'll take a closer look at now. Maria is in reality Mary, just a much sexier version born from James's imagination. She is basically the idealized dream woman he imagines, but simultaneously, in a strange way, Mary is also Maria. You can tell because Maria always speaks with a variety of voices. Sometimes she knows James very well and recounts specific shared memories with him based on his recollections. We also see this in the following dialogue. Remember that time in the hotel. Are you? You said you took everything, but you forgot that videotape we made? I wonder if it's still there. But then again, she is also the person James actually desires in his imagination, kind of provocative and all that. And you notice that again when she takes on her other form. It would be quite accurate to say that Maria is actually Mary in James's newly improved and updated version. We can also find Maria's classic old outfit over in Jack's Inn, which she very nicely demonstrates for us here. In fact, she already wore that in the original Silent Hill 2, and right here I'll show you another version of it as well. Also, Maria has a specific reaction when James saves the game, and that's because James is essentially getting lost in his thoughts at that point. While saving, Maria even mentions this to James. Have you ever noticed that Maria absolutely doesn't want to go to certain places? For example, this place is also after Jack's Inn, after we've opened the gate, this mysterious house here. And that also has a bit to do with Maria's story. But since she's actually just a figment of James's imagination, it's a bit hard to interpret. However, when we go in here, she says the following.
Is everything going all right with you today?
Yeah, I don't know. It's just that, honestly, this whole dark and abandoned place just really gives me the absolute creeps every time I look around. I'm not sure why.
Have you ever been inside of it?
I'm not entirely sure. It does feel strangely familiar, like a distant memory just out of reach. But I'm not quite certain if I've been here before or if it's just my mind playing tricks. I'm really not sure.
Sure, I can do that. In some ways it honestly feels like a distant and unpleasant memory that I would rather forget, but in reality it is truly nothing of importance. Although, to be perfectly honest, saying that is actually kind of nonsense, especially when you consider the fact that Maria is really just a fictional person who was entirely created by the imagination of James. Besides, Maria also doesn't want to go into the bathrooms. Why that is, I still don't really know myself. In fact, in this specific area, we also find the crucial item that basically gives us the final ending. By drinking a special potion at the very end, and then having a truly happy ending with Mary. Maybe that's also why she doesn't want to go into this place. The fact that Maria actually doesn't want you to find or help Mary becomes even clearer when we walk away from her destination.
Hey, I'm totally in favor of taking the scenic route, but we are certainly not.
If we take a moment to step back and look at the situation from a much broader perspective, the truth of the matter is that when you really examine all of the specific details and the underlying facts that are currently at play here, the reality is quite clear.
She wants to be the main woman herself and of course doesn't want to support Mary. Even though you always protect Maria well and defend her from terrifying monsters, and James follows his deep-seated thoughts that Maria is his absolute dream woman, it's actually the case that Maria is slowly and painfully turning into Mary and is already starting to have her very first bouts of physical weakness. You especially notice this within the hospital where, symbolically, she turns away from James for the first time and takes a much-needed rest. This becomes even more obvious when you unlock the Maria ending, and with her you basically leave Silent Hill. In the final cutscene you then notice that Maria suddenly starts coughing and James is already a bit harsh with her. He tells her that she should really get herself treated. When we look at them in direct contrast to Maria, however, Eddie and Angela are actually real, living human characters. But did you know that Eddie already has visible freezing cold breath when you first encounter him? This is meant to symbolize that Eddie lives in a very cold world, where he is often subjected to constant bullying and harsh discrimination. We also notice during the final boss fight that it takes place in a slaughterhouse which has pork carcasses hanging from the ceiling, which basically serves as a metaphor for Eddie and his dark, cold world. Many players initially thought that the pizza eating scene with Eddie had been cut. Actually, I find it even crazier that Eddie just sticks his hand into an ice cream tub and then eats the ice cream straight from the tub with his hand. Personally, I find that even more bizarre and it represents Eddie even more. Nevertheless, the pizza scene still exists, but in a slightly different form, or at least as a nod to the old one, Silent.
The vibrant, beautiful, scenic landscape of Hill Valley.
In fact, we can find this dialogue in Pete's bowling bar when we examine the slice of pizza in the back, and by doing so we also get the trophy, Leftovers. Now let's take a closer look at a few small story details about Angela, which you might not have noticed either, since they're of course pretty cryptically hidden away in the game. Angela is actually only 19 years old. That doesn't really come across in the game since she's portrayed as much older there. This is meant to hint at the pain and suffering she experienced during her childhood years, and as a result she seems much older than 19. Angela also has significant personal issues with herself, as one might expect. But did you notice that she also bites her fingernails? In this shot, you can really see just how anxious Angela actually is, and I think this little detail is really quite striking. It was deliberately included by the developers. Since Silent Hill reflects people's thoughts, Angela actually sees Silent Hill completely differently than James does. For her, it's a burned place where there aren't as many sexy monsters wandering around as there are for James. Her world is completely different, even though she's also in Silent Hill. By the way, at the gallows puzzle you can also read a small part of Angela's story. There's a sentence there that's very clear and actually tailored exactly to Angela. Personally, I'm not even sure if Angela is already really dead when we meet her, but there's a lot that suggests she is, especially since the other protagonists are all no longer living, or are merely memories pieced together from different thoughts. And since we can also find Angela's grave, it's safe to assume that most of the protagonists have already died. Finally, I've gathered a few small background details about Laura for you, because her story in particular is quite cryptic and difficult to understand. Laura's drawings already give us an initial idea of who Laura actually is, because Laura is a very good friend of Mary, and her drawings usually show two rabbits, with one of them already looking a bit battered. And of course, you know who that's referring to. Laura also sees Silent Hill very differently from James, and naturally there are no monsters in her world either. Her mind is basically still untouched by any evil deeds, and this is also shown in this dialogue which already existed in the original Silent Hill. James is worried about Laura here, but Laura actually has no concerns at all because she simply hasn't developed any fears yet. And with that, this now brings us to the conclusion of the first part of the Secrets of the Silent Hill: Easter egg discoveries. I hope I was able to assist you in discovering even more about the mysterious facade of Silent Hill and its characters. I'd love it if you could share your thoughts and discuss this further in the comments section below. And if you enjoyed the video, please feel free to smash that like button to give the algorithm a little extra boost. So my dear friends, that is all for our video today, but until we meet again next time, please make sure to take wonderful care of yourselves, stay safe, adios, and a warm ciao ciao for now.